I want to give out a shout out to Kevin over on the Patreon. Thank you very much for being a patron. Anybody who wishes to follow suit, there's a link in the description box below. But his idea here for 24 hours of Cover Killer Nation was to discuss favorite lineups of groups or how that affects perception. And I think it's a really good topic. It's one that we talk about in passing whenever we discuss album reviews. We talk about how brand new additions to lineups or change-ups in the lineup affect the sound and affect how things go. And we've seen this in some famous cases that it's really encountered a bit of negative backlash, but we've also seen where the lineup changes truly for the better. And a couple that come to mind immediately are Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, because in the 1990s they both had a brand new lead singer, they had some brand new folks to the fold, and it was a very love 'em or hate 'em style of response for this. So you have iconic singers such as Bruce Dickinson in Iron Maiden and Rob Halford in Judas Priest. You replace them with Blaze Bayley and Ripper Owens respectively, and all of a sudden all of that iconic status or all of that iconic sound seems to take a bit of a change. There are people that like Ripper Owens a good bit, but perhaps don't like or prefer his Judas Priest material over what they heard from Rob Halford. So you're not going to sometimes hear an album such as Demolition, for example, or really spoken within the same regard as you would a Painkiller. Same thing with Blaze Bayley. The X Factor, I think, is right up there with some of the best Iron Maiden albums, but often is one that is forgotten and instead replaced with names such as Number of the Beast. We've seen this so often in not only heavy metal, but in music in general. But in heavy metal, one of the most iconic changes was no doubt the change from Ozzy Osbourne to Ronnie James Dio in the early 1980s. And this is actually when you see it done, I guess, right, if you really want to paint it that way, or at least a change at the vocal helm or at the helm period that has sparked only more positive vibes as opposed to negative ones. Whereas the two Ronnie James Dio albums that we've got, of course, Heaven and Hell and The Mob Rules being those two albums, are considered to be iconic. They're huge, important parts of the Black Sabbath discography, and really it serves as a potential question point whether or not Ozzy Osbourne could have given those two albums the same iconic twist. But we see this also just within heavy metal itself. We see this with bands such as Iced Earth, where Matt Barlow has opted to go and do his own thing and has had sort of his own motivations, left the band, and was replaced by, once again, the aforementioned Tim Ripper Owens, and it's been something where there are preferences there as to who is liked more. It's something that sparks interesting debates, though I'm not sure if all of the debates really need to be sparked. I think that a lot of times whenever you see some folks leave the band, you have to be willing to kind of check out what is offered, because you can see changes cause a little bit of further diversity from the group. You can see how groups kind of grow and evolve their sound based off of the shift. And once again, I'm going to go back to the X Factor on this one, because you sort of heard that Iron Maiden was sort of taking a little bit of a direction that had a little bit of a darker, slower twinge to it, perhaps on albums such as Fear of the Dark or No Prayer for the Dying. But then with the X Factor, they were just embodied sort of in this darkness. Whenever this album was recorded, there was not a lot of bright. I would describe the album as the grayish-black color that you see on its album cover, and it's one that's very accurate, and it starts off immediately with a track such as Sign of the Cross. Just the way in which this song is presented during its recording, just the way in which the tone is really kind of stepped down in order to accompany Blaze's voice, which is in no way as high as Bruce Dickinson's. They really shifted up the sound a bit to really accompany him, and he was able to follow suit and deliver on the X Factor a phenomenal piece of work. And there's a lot of question about the iconic nature of the band based around how that goes, whether or not it's worth having this happen, or should they just wait for these members. Personally speaking, and we just saw this over the weekend where Axl Rose is going to take over for Brian Johnson and AC/DC. Now, this obviously, this lineup is not going to go into the studio and record albums or anything like that. That's not what this deal is all about. But imagine what would happen if Axl Rose did record an album with AC/DC. Would it really be something that was all of that different? It would just be a different voice that is heralding, all of the words, the lyrics of the iconic band. Sort of the attitude would go along with it, maybe some writing as well. It would really be something where that thump and the traditional sound of AC/DC would no doubt have a similar tone to it. However, it's also possible that Axl would be able to bring his own element to the group, which some people would say would be a great thing, while others would say perhaps it emanates too much to his band, Guns N' Roses. Now, we talk a lot about vocalists right now in the past 5 minutes of this video, but what about guitarists? What about instrumental players? Is there really large differences that occur there? If you take a gander at a discography from a band such as Death, you will note that there are some differences that do come now, but it's also based largely among the vision of the mainstay of the band, which in that case was Chuck. Chuck had a very profound vision about what he wanted Death to be all about, and he wanted to push the boundaries of what this death metal creation that he and a couple of other bands were able to really spark in America, which was also being sparked in Europe, was all about. He wanted to take it to the next level. And really, as you watch what your contemporaries are doing surrounding you, you kind of get these ideas, You get your idea of your own identity, but you also start to hear of ways that perhaps you can twinge it and give it something, a little bit of extra spark, And having some of the iconic names that Death had among its registry is one of the other critical aspects that make their discography so memorable, considering no two albums really sound the same. Even near the end there, where you hear the differences between Symbolic and The Sound of Perseverance, Symbolic strikes you as a little bit more of a direct album than The Sound of Perseverance. And whenever you see how that contextually moved over to Chuck and Shannon going to Control Denied, for example, and formulating something a little bit different with that project, you can see just how even the same players can create different sounds, but how having different individuals in on the fold, trying things out, doing things a little bit differently, perhaps bringing a brand new and fresh perspective, can craft a discography that is seen as one of the most iconic in extreme music. So, while a lot of the times we find ourselves checking at lineup changes and seeing people leaving to maybe accomplish their own goals or start their own projects, help other bands out, it sometimes should be seen with a little bit more positivity. It should be seen a little bit more as a catalyst point, potentially, to see your favorite band go through a different phase of its career, and one that could take it to a brand new level, elevate it with some new sounds, elevate it with some new ideas, and perhaps the addition of somebody new pushes the band over the top and pushes an album over the top. It's not always a death sentence. Now, there are some folks out there that their departure would be iconic, and their departure would no doubt leave some of the same sour feelings that we talked about on the onset with people such as Bruce Dickinson or Rob Halford or even Ozzy Osbourne. Mike Ackerford, for example, from Opeth would be a good example, considering he's been seen as the face of this band throughout its entirety. Mike Portnoy leaving Dream Theater, for example, was seen as almost an irreplaceable element, but Mike Mangini was able to come in and really handle the job quite nicely. It's something where perhaps James LeBray leaving Dream Theater would leave a lot of fans confused, or a lot of fans clamoring for that epic voice once again. But who knows who he'd be, replaced by, for example. That's kind of just the crazy way in which this goes. It's happened with so many of the iconic artists that are out there, including those in the Big Four. If you take a look at Anthrax, there's been a vocal change. If you take a look at Megadeth, it's been a revolving door of guitar players and instrumentalists. You even take a look at Metallica, it's been, in its earliest days, was a revolving door, and ever since their first album, there's only been 2 real big moves, and both of them have been in the bass position. So it's something that almost no band is really able to avoid, and those that are able to are very, very fortunate indeed. What are some iconic lineup shifts that you know of that really made a huge impact to you on a band's sound? Whether it be positive or negative, let me know in the comments below, because this is a debate that could honestly lead to lists. It could lead to top 10 lists, top 10 best moves or best lineup changes in history, top 10 worst lineup changes in history. Let me know some that you feel are the best or some that you feel are the worst in the comments below. My name is coverkillernation. You are right smack dab in the middle of 24 hours of CKN. Man, we're going strong. Man, we're going high and tight. Continue watching. We have a lot more to come. I'll talk to you later. Peace.